Okay, we want to welcome everyone for being here. It's a pleasure having you. I'm David Andrade, Principal Broker of Realtypath. And today we're going to be going over the new forms that are a result of the NAR settlement and lawsuit and settlement. A couple of requests to make. Today we are going to go the plan is to go from 10 till 11:30. If we end early, great. We will try to end no matter what at 11:30. If you've got questions after the fact, you can just come up and we'll do our best to answer those questions. Okay. We've got two microphones. I've got one on me as the presenter, and this will be handed around for questions. Okay. One of the requests we have is that you write down your questions. This helped us save a lot of time. Last time we had a plethora of questions. I'm sure you're going to have a lot of questions. So during the presentation, we're not going to take any questions. So as something comes up, go ahead and write it down, and then we'll make sure to get to your questions when we get to the Q&A part. Okay. I do want to introduce Linda Masher, who's our managing broker here in the Sandy office. She's an amazing woman, incredible broker. And a few other people who are here with Realtypath assisting today. We've got Caleb Wirtz, who's also one of our managing brokers here out of the Sandy office. Steve Romero, who's over our compliance. Inundated with questions. We've been pinging things off of each other. Some recent changes, even as of yesterday, that we were talking about. So we'll be talking about those today. Chris in the back, Chris Petty, who's our IT director. Phenomenal gentleman. Any IT questions you have, I'm sure you've already talked to him about your IT needs. And we'll kick this off by bringing up our sponsor, if I can call you a sponsor. This is Robert Buchanan with First Rate Home Loans, going to give us an update on the market and how mortgages are going.
Yeah, real quick, my name is Robert Buchanan. I'm also known as Coach B, the mortgage coach. I see plenty of you that you've got Mountain Dew. I see you've got coffee. I see, some energy drinks, maybe some caffeine back there. Just so you know, I sponsor a refrigerator out there. So if you guys get a little sleepy, gets a little, mundane, hey, go pick up an energy drink just in the refrigerator out in the lobby out there. That's on me. You don't owe me anything. That's my favor to you. Market, are rates up or down? Down. Rates are down, right? So market is picking up. I wanted to bring just an idea for you. I think everybody knows rates are coming down. It is projected that rates are going to continue to come down over the next year or so. How fast and by when, who knows, right? It looks as though we've already factored in the rate cut that's supposed to happen in September. Most likely 50 basis points, the Fed rate cut. Does that affect rates? Yes and no. It looks like it is already affected rates. So we're priced in right now that rate cut is coming. So where do we see the rates? People that make much more money than me, much smarter than me, are looking at rates somewhere in the 5 to mid 5s next year. So keep that in mind. What's the cost of waiting to buy now versus then for that 5.5 or lower rate? You know the cost, right? There's an opportunity cost. Get your buyers in now. Let's date the rate, right? Marry the home, okay? You guys have all heard that analogy. Let me leave you with this idea. Did you know that you can buy a home for your either buyers or investors as if the home was already built out the way they had envisioned it? For example, a lot of young people are looking for ways to get into home, and a way they can do that is what we call house hacking, or buying a house that either already has an ADU in it. Everybody knows what an ADU is, correct? Or you can buy the house as if the ADU has already been built or perfected, and you get paid as if that was already done at closing. That's a loan that is available to your investors, young buyers that are looking for ways to house hack, to get into a home and, absorb some of that cost of purchasing and buying a home today. So if you have any questions about that or how to do that, I'm your guy. I can get that done. I specialize in investors. I do all loans, but I love doing investors because it's fun, exciting, and I love getting kids into homes. And I've, by the way, this year helped a 29-year-old lady buy her fourth investment property, and she's worked her way up every time. So if you have any questions or concerns, again, here are my cards up there. I'm in the back. My office is in the very back, and I'll be here throughout the day. We're providing lunch. It'll be here around 11:15. So right when you guys are ready to go, Jimmy John's. Any questions anybody has? If not, I'm going to turn the time back over.
Robert, thank you. And I'll make a small plug for Robert as well. I've recently sent him a client who we could argue doesn't yet qualify. And I appreciate his long-term vision. Real estate, you're in this industry for the long haul, right? Most of our clients, we're incubating them. It takes a long time sometimes to get them going and getting them into a home. I appreciate you. So I just want to give him a plug because we could have easily brushed her off to the side. He gives me updates all the time. So, okay. Forgive me one moment as I pull up my notes. I've got them on my phone here. And I notice that I'm more succinct if I've got my notes on me. So bear with me for a moment. Okay. So I just want to pull up a couple of links that you can reference, and give me one moment here. Okay, so we're going to start out at utahrealtors.com, and utahrealtors.com is going to have information on the lawsuit. I want to give a quick recap of the lawsuit. I know most of you know the details. Originated in Missouri. We're taking the fall for some bad actors in Missouri. Utah, I've been told on numerous occasions, would have probably easily won the suit had it remained a state-by-state suit. But it did not remain a state-by-state suit. It was consolidated into a national suit. We got lumped into it. And the reason why Utah probably was a state that was very protected is we already delineated how much would go to a buyer's agent. Right? So if you looked at our exclusive right to sell agreement, you had a section that talked about the total commission, and then you had a section that talked about how much would go toward a buyer's agent's commission. Right? In the state of Missouri, they did not have that. So affiliate commissions in the state of Missouri were not fully disclosed to sellers. So the plaintiffs in Missouri came along and basically said, well, I agreed to pay you as the listing agent. I never agreed to pay this buyer's agent. Why is it my obligation to pay the buyer's agent? And that's how we got into this big mess, okay? A few other states were like Missouri. They probably would have been equally in hot water. My own personal opinion is that the attorneys are the big winners in all this. And though it's kind of unfair to us that we've been paying years into this war chest and someone has kind of pierced that war chest and now there's hundreds of millions of dollars in payouts. That's a nice aspect of it as well. It's nice to know that we have the NAR to back us up in this type of situation, that we're not having to deal with it as an individual class action lawsuit, okay? It's weird to me that we are even involved with a class action lawsuit. Usually when I think of class action lawsuits, I'm thinking like pharmaceuticals or some industrial company that's dumped toxic waste into a river, right? But here we are, a service company. And it has me concerned because I think, well, if we're one of the first services companies to be, or not companies, but industries to be hit with a class action lawsuit, what are the next ones, And I hope the attorneys end up going after each other. That's don't record this, scratch up on the record. But anyway, if it starts with real estate, who knows if tomorrow it's accountants and whatnot. So all of these changes come about due to that lawsuit. The forms that we will be going over are a result of that. Now, I've had real estate agents say, is this federal law? Is it Utah law? We're going to make the differentiation there, okay? This is not federal law. This is just a result of a lawsuit that has happened nationwide. And so we're now abiding by the settlement of that lawsuit. But is it federal law? No, it's not. There are changes being made on the local level that are Utah law, and we'll talk about those changes as well, okay? Since we are members of the National Association of Realtors, we have to abide by the result of that lawsuit, okay? Now, the good news is Realtypath is not a part of the lawsuit. We were initially named in the statewide lawsuit, but when it was consolidated into a nationwide lawsuit, I don't know where they came up with their arbitrary figures, but they did. They basically said that any company that had over $2 billion in sales volume in the year 2022, why 2022, I don't know, would be subject to paying into the class action lawsuit. We were under that threshold, okay? Now, we had to go through the exercise of actually tallying up our sales volume and seeing what it was. And we also went through the exercise of seeing what our average commissions were on any given transaction side, okay, for the year 2022. If you were to take a stab at what that is, any guess as to what the average commission was on any transaction side in the year 2022 as a real? Okay, now that would be both sides combined, just one side. 2.25. You got it, spot on, 2.25, which kind of surprised me, but didn't. I think it already showed that we had some downward pressure in our industry, maybe due to a myriad of factors. I think one, we are used to chipping into our transactions. I see it all the time, agents who try to get the deal done, right? Buyer and seller get to a point where they're at an impasse. The agent says, agent reaches out to the other agent and says, hey, what do we need to do to get this deal closed? Everyone's chipping in to make it happen. I think some agents are used to discounting to get the business, especially when things got really competitive in 2021. I think we saw a lot of discounting that probably trickled over into the year 2022. Now, I share that because I think one of the biggest fears that comes of this lawsuit is what is going to happen to our industry? Is it going to be dog eat dog, right? That's one of the biggest fears. Will there be competition that increases on the listing side? My personal opinion is yes. I think we're going to see more competition on the listing side. But one thing I love about our industry is we are a cooperative industry. Listing agents work with buyer's agents, okay? And to get a deal done, that's usually what we're doing. We're cooperating with each other. Yes, there's a negotiation aspect. Sure, there's been agents you've worked with that you don't like or the experience wasn't great, but it's still a cooperation, okay? So where does this fear come about? Well, a lot of that comes about due to how we manage showings, okay? So we're going to talk about that. We're actually going to talk about a new form that we have. Now, before I jump into this, it is a requirement. A result of this lawsuit is that we are now required to get permission prior to showing a home to a prospective buyer, okay? I don't know why not all of the boards of realtors in the state of Utah haven't done this, but the Washington County Board has provided its members a showing form, okay? The rest of the boards haven't followed suit. So as a company, we turn to our legal counsel. We love the gal that we've hired. She used to be the commissioner for the Division of Real Estate. Her name is Deanna Saby. She has drafted a showing form for us, and I'll pull that up for you so you can see that. And I've gotten a lot of questions about this agreement. We promised last week that it would be up on realtypathlibrary.com. It will be up today. This draft of it will be up today, but we are getting a liability waiver portion added to it. That was one thing that Deanna told us was missing. She said you probably need to add a liability waiver, okay? So as a result of this lawsuit, there's one of two requirements that must be fulfilled prior to showing a property to a prospective buyer, okay? One is you have to have some type of showing agreement, okay? The other is you must have a buyer-broker agreement. And this is where that scare tactic, that fear comes in, where it could be dog eat dog, where you have a buyer who calls you and says, well, I want to see this property. And you go, well, great, I need you to sign one of two forms, either a buyer broker agreement or a limited showing agreement, okay? And then the buyer says to you, well, I talked to such and such agent with such and such company, and they told me that they'll show me and I don't have to sign anything. Okay. This is where it gets tricky. This is where we technically need to do some self patrolling, I guess, some policing. I hate to even use that word, but that's how we keep each other in check. Okay. We all play by the same rules. I think the violators will probably be reported pretty quickly. Okay. Now, this limited showing agreement that we've had drafted, we tried to make it as simple as possible. But it is still 2 pages long, okay, or almost 2 pages long, okay? And it basically gives you the right as the buyer's agent to show properties to a prospective buyer, okay? You only need this once. You don't need it for every single property, okay? That was one question that came up last week. Do I need it for every single property? No, you just need it for the client. And then, of course, it goes over the scope and purpose of the limited showing agreement, which is basically to open the door, walk them through. We had some questions last week about limited agency. Does this establish agency? I'm not an attorney. I can't give you legal advice, but here's what I know. If you're giving any type of advice, does that potentially establish some form of agency? The answer is yes. Okay. This is not a full-blown representation agreement. Okay. That's one thing you can tell prospective buyers. You can just simply say, I need this in order to open doors and get you into a property. Okay. But is it possible they're going to start asking you questions and you start giving advice? When that occurs, is there some form of agency? The answer is yes. Okay. Now, my experience has been, and I'm sure it's been for you, one of the most important parts of prospecting our business is building rapport with people, right? They, especially if they've never met us, maybe they're a warm lead from our website, any other source, right? When they call, my goal has always been in the past when I work with clients is I want to meet them. I want them to see me face to face so I can build rapport and see if I want to work with them, if they want to work with me. And you can kind of tell pretty quickly based on body language if someone wants to work with you or not, okay? This is a soft shoe into getting the buyer broker agreement. But if you want to go ahead and start with the buyer broker agreement, you can do that. And one of the suggested strategies that I've heard is that you just use the buyer broker agreement specifically for that one property that you want to show. Okay. And I'll pull up the latest buyer broker agreement. So we're going to pull up all the forms and review those as well. By the way, I apologize. I didn't actually go to any links on utahrealtors.com. I just want you to know that if you have questions relating to the suit, there's a whole FAQ section on utahrealtors.com. Okay. Okay, so the forms, let's talk about when all this goes into effect. I'm sure you already know, August 17th, we're 3 days away. Today is a deadline. Does anybody know what today's deadline is? Yes, it's a little obscure. In my opinion, not incredibly important, but today is the deadline to download all of your sales data if you want that, okay? Sales data relating to what your commissions were on any property, all of that is going away. I didn't know that that was a part of the settlement, but I guess it is. So the MLS will no longer show historical commission data. So if you want to know what yours was, or anybody else for that matter, you can jump on the MLS, do a search, download a CSV, and I guess you'll have all that data. Okay. But as of today, it goes away. Okay. Let's go ahead and jump into the various agreements that we have here. So we've got first the listing agreement. I'm going to look for the buyer broker agreement first. Okay. Exclusive buyer broker agreement. And I'm also going to pull up my companion form from last week just so that I can follow along, okay? Some of this has changed slightly, but I think for the most part, this is the same, okay? So let me go back over. Okay, so As a result of the lawsuit, commissions are no longer shown on the MLS. Where will they be shown? Well, the majority of brokerages are planning on putting the compensation on their websites. We are also following that pattern. We're going to put our compensation on realtypath.com. I'm actually going to train on how to update that. What I imagine will happen in practice is that when an agent is calling you, if you're a listing agent and you've got a listing and a buyer's agent's reaching out, it's probably going to be a quick text message. Hey, are you offering a BBC or a BAC as we used to call it? And that text message can be used to help you draft up your offer. Okay. So if you're a buyer's agent, you're reaching out to a listing agent, you're saying, hey, how much BAC are you offering on this property, or is your client offering on this property? You'll be able to take note of that and then include that in your offer. Okay. And we're going to go over the rep sheet today as well, which includes a section on compensation. You may have already seen that. Last week, the rep sheet did not have that. So hopefully today they have it updated. I've been promised that all the forms should be fully updated before August 17th. Okay. I think even the UAR is scrambling to make minor changes here and there. And like I mentioned before, Steve brought to my attention a change that I think just happened yesterday with check boxes. And what do we do when these check boxes aren't in there? So we're going to go over that here in a moment too. So that's what I think will happen in practice. I mean, for agents who don't want to bother other agents and they just want to try to find compensation online, you may go to kellerwilliams.com or Remax or what have you, trying to look for compensation. That may be more of a hassle than just reaching out to the agent and saying, hey, what compensation, if any, is your client offering on this listing? Okay. And that, based on that information, you'll be able to incorporate that into your offer. Okay. I'm getting ahead of myself and I apologize, but on a listing, I would imagine that it's going to be business as usual. When you're taking a listing appointment and you're sitting down, you may have some sellers who are privy to this whole lawsuit. I've already had some questions where sellers are going, oh, great, I don't have to pay commissions anymore. And that's just simply not true, okay? Properly educating your client will be that they're hiring you for a specific rate, okay? And the exclusive right to sell agreement now separates the listing commission from the buyer's agent's commission, okay? In the past, section 2 of that listing agreement kind of clumped it all together. And then you had a small paragraph at the bottom that said X amount was going to the buyer's agent.
And before that, it was still saying that was going to be, on to the broker.
Yes. Well, so we're going to go over that.
I mean, before.
Yeah. We'll get to that. Yep. So now the way that it's differentiated is that section 2 is only for the listing commission, but then the part underneath is specifically for the buyer's agent's commission. So we'll get to that here in just a moment. Okay, so some of the key things from this buyer broker agreement to be aware of. Okay. Down here in section 2.2, the company is authorized to advertise or otherwise communicate. Hold on, that's the listing agreement. I knew it was in the wrong place. Exclusive buyer broker agreement. Okay. This is the new one. Let's just double check. Yes. Yeah. I just like seeing formatting, so bear with me. Yeah. Okay. So you'll see in here, there's several sections that have changed. In section 1.2, you can delineate whether or not it's a property or if you're representing them in a particular county. I've been asked whether or not you can put all counties in the state of Utah. I've asked that question to our legal counsel, kind of got a vague response back. It was, you really shouldn't. You should be putting like Salt Lake and Utah County. But I'm sure we're going to see a lot of agents say every county in the state of Utah, okay? Or under this section, every property in the state of Utah, okay?
Any.
Or any, yep, exactly. Now this section down here, the buyer does have representation agreement with another brokerage for the following properties, and these properties are excluded from this exclusive buyer broker agreement. Now, this is one of the key differences. In the past, we had this very mutually exclusive arrangement, right? If you had a buyer broker agreement with another agent and you were, or your client did, it was a no-no. It was against the code of ethics, right? To engage them to buy another property. That is no longer the case. If you can have multiple buyer broker agreements, okay? So if Linda's got a buyer that is interested in seeing properties with her in Davis County, but that same buyer wants to see properties with me in Salt Lake County, and my buyer broker agreement says Salt Lake County and hers says Davis, that's kosher, okay? In the past, that was a big no-no, okay? So this is one of those aspects of the industry that has changed, okay? Most of the preamble of the code of ethics still applies, right? Where we're in a cooperative industry, we owe each other respect, and this isn't free license to try to steal somebody's client, but you cannot violate a buyer broker agreement that's in place. Like using that same example, if Linda's got a buyer broker agreement in Davis County and I try to show properties in Davis County, now I'm violating that agreement, okay? And that's why I think a lot of agents will be like, well, I just want the whole state of Utah. So I'm going to fill this section 1.2 out to say the whole state of Utah so that they have to work with me. That's probably what we will see in practice, okay? So then down here, it says, during the initial term of this exclusive buyer broker agreement and any extensions thereof, the buyer agrees not to enter into another buyer broker agreement with another real estate agent or brokerage that conflicts with this exclusive buyer broker agreement. So only if it conflicts are you prohibited from entering into a different buyer broker agreement, okay? And I think we may see that with some buyers. Some buyers may say, I just want you to show me this one property and I'll sign an agreement for just that one property. So going back to this showing form, if they don't want to sign the showing form or you're presenting them a buyer broker agreement, you can just say, hey, this is a buyer broker agreement just for this one property. That way, our arrangement is still open-ended. If you want to shop other agents, you can shop other agents. I imagine that in our industry, we're going to try to pin down that client as best we can. But in order to build rapport, we may give them some leeway by just signing a buyer broker agreement for one property. Okay, so you have that freedom. Okay. So down here in section 2.2, if seller's brokerage and or the company owner is compensating the company on a property acquired by the buyer, then the compensation paid to the company by the seller's brokerage and or the property owner shall satisfy the buyer's obligation for the brokerage fee shown above, provided that the compensation is equal to the brokerage fee, okay? And then I highlighted this next section. The company may not accept total compensation from any source that is greater than the brokerage fee. So let me hit pause on that real fast. I think this is weird, but it is just the way it is, okay? If you have on your buyer broker agreement total compensation of 2%, but the listing's offering 3%, you cannot technically get 3% according to this, okay? You're in violation of your own agreement. So my recommendation is start high on your buyer broker agreement. Maybe even go as high as 4, because going the opposite direction is legit. Going up, the only way you can go up, based on what I've been told by legal counsel, is if you're offering some type of service that is above and beyond the regular scope of business, okay? That you're some specialist in short sales, or you're some new construction specialist. You have to show something that's objectively provable that you're offering a greater service in order to receive greater compensation, okay? So let me repeat that in another way. The best thing to do in practice when you get a buyer broker agreement signed is start high. I put 3% on there, put 4%, and then tell your client, if the listing offers less, I'll take whatever the listing takes. That's up to you, okay? But going up apparently is a violation of law. Coming down is not. Do y'all follow that? Okay. Sure. Now, what is scary, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, Cesar, but I told everyone to hold their questions till the end, so make sure to write down your questions. But I will answer that one now. you technically can hold them, not technically, you have a legal right to hold them to whatever you put down. So you will probably get pushback from your buyer. If your buyer goes, well, this says I owe you 5%. That's true. You could hold them to 5%. Okay. So now they, that's one thing that could be some pushback. I think a lot of agents will probably just put 3%. Once again, as a result of this lawsuit, there is no standard commission, but you get to choose. So you could start higher. I would say on average, commissions are probably going to be around 2 to 3%. I'm only taking your question because you're in our compliance department. So yes, we're going to get back to the listing side.
Companies are asking for buyer broker agreements. I've seen in the emails that are coming over, so title companies are asking for your buyer broker agreement, so they know they're paying you correctly. So.
Yes. Yep. Was that your question? Yeah, let's hold on. And once again, I just request that you write down your questions because there are going to be a lot of them, and I'm sure. And I apologize for being slightly out of order, but I did want to start on the buying side of things. So let's read this last line. In the event the compensation paid by the seller's brokerage and or the property owner is less than the brokerage fee, the buyer shall pay any remaining difference at closing. So assessor, that answers your question. You could hold them to 5% and they would have to pay the difference if the listing is paying less than what's on your buyer broker agreement. Okay. Okay, and then this is the key part that is added in both the buyer broker agreement as well as the exclusive right to sale agreement, which is the brokerage fees are fully negotiable and are not set by law. Any board or association of realtors, multiple listing service, or any other manner other than between the company and the buyer. Okay. So the key thing to note is that commissions are negotiable throughout this whole process. Okay. And always have been. Yes, that's true. The only difference is in the past, you had a guarantee of compensation with cooperating brokerages. Okay. And what I mean by that is if you went to the MLS and the MLS said 3% BAC at the bottom, you could hold that brokerage liable for compensation. We've had disputes. I'm sure you guys have been a part of them where an agent, when the agent makes an offer on a property, the BAC being offered on the MLS is 3%. And then at some point in time, the listing agent goes in there and drops it down to 2.5 or 2. And there's been arguments of compensation. Whatever was on there, the listing brokerage would be obligated to pay. Now that that goes away, everything is fully transparent. And I think that's probably been the biggest issue and probably one of the biggest benefits of this lawsuit is that everything is fully transparent. In the past, let's talk about one key point. In the past, it was a big no-no to incorporate commissions into the contract. Remember, and agents would do it all the time. You'd write an addendum that says, the buyer and seller agree that the buyer's agent will receive an additional 1%. And we as brokers would come back and say, no, that's a big no-no. You can't do that anymore. You have to put that on an escrow instruction form. Now it's legit. And we're going to go over forms like the brokerage payment form, which allows for additional compensation.
But that changed how many years ago too? I mean, back when you had to do escrow instructions.
Yeah.
And that form changed. I don't remember how long ago
it wasn't too long ago.
The couple of days I've been doing this, it doesn't seem like that long.
Yes. Yep. And we will get to that. So, okay. One other crucial part, and this is also in the exclusive right to sell agreement, which is this portion right here under section 8, where it says the buyer forfeits any and all rights to participate in any class action against the company. In particular, the buyer agrees not to be a representative or a member of any class of claimants or act as a private attorney general in litigation, arbitration, administration proceeding with respect to any claim arising out of the exclusive buyer broker agreement. So once again, that protective language that says you will not participate in a future class action lawsuit. Okay. Now let's go back to the exclusive right to sell agreement. Okay. And let me pull that up in here. Okay. And Steve, correct me if I'm wrong. This is the one we were talking about, right? With the check boxes? Okay. Yeah, right here. Right. And I think the form that I have downloaded may not have, no, it does. Okay. Yep, it has those. So, okay, let's talk about, and Linda and I, at some point prior to the end of this, we are going to do some role play because there's been some request of role playing, and we'll do our best. We'll be the best actors that we can be. Okay. Let's talk about the exclusive buyer or exclusive right to sell agreement. When you sit down with your client, there are various ways in which you can approach compensation. First and foremost, you need to negotiate your compensation, okay, as a listing agent. And this section right here first delineates the compensation to you as listing agent. In the past, this section right here was a combination of everything. Like usually you would have 5 or 6% in that section. That is no longer the case. This is, oh, and I apologize. That's the buyer brokerage. Let me scroll up. Right here. That section right here, okay? This is compensation to you as the listing agent, okay? I apologize, I was scrolled down too far. So you'll notice that you still have a dollar sign and a percentage sign, okay? And I think it's become pretty common in the real estate industry for most brokerages to charge some type of administrative fee and a percentage. So this is where most agents will put, like for Realtypath, we have our $395 administrative fee. That's probably where you'd put that. And then you'd have your compensation. Now remember, this is just your compensation as a listing agent. So if you're going to charge 3%, you would put 3% in that section, okay? Now down here is compensation for the buyer's agent, okay? Now, this part is important. I've been asked whether or not this can just be left blank or if the words to be negotiated. The answer is on the listing side, yes. Yes, the seller can choose to not offer a buyer's compensation. And those words in there, you know, that it's fully negotiable, are fully negotiable and not set by law. Okay. So you may sit down with the seller who says, well, I'm willing to work with the buyer's agent, but I'd rather let them just make an offer and ask for compensation, and we'll negotiate at the time that an offer is presented. I think we're going to see a lot of that. Okay. Now, we are in an industry where people rely heavily on, you know, our professional expertise, okay, our professional knowledge. And this is where I think, my personal opinion is, I think it will be business as usual. I think we'll be able to sit down and say, hey, if you really want to lock down a buyer, you should offer a fair buyer's agent's compensation. Plant that seed, let them know. Because even if they receive an offer, the buyer's agent's going to be asking for some percentage, on average, somewhere between 2 and 3%. So I think to prime the pump, I would strongly encourage your seller to offer some type of buyer's agent's compensation. Okay. But just so there's no confusion, if the seller says, well, I'm willing to pay up to 5%, I'll give you 2.5, and I'll give the buyer's agent 2.5. This would be 2.5, and this would be 2.5. Okay. But don't make the mistake of putting 5 up here and 2.5 down here, because now that seller is going to be obligated to 7.5. Does that make sense? And we may see some of that, but I'm sure none of us are going to try to enforce that. Maybe some crooked agents, who knows? Back to your question yesterday, Steve, about you know, these check boxes. Okay, I think where these will come into play is if an agent accidentally puts like $10,000 and 2% here, maybe based on an estimated purchase price of 500,000. But if they don't check one, this is where our compliance department will push back and say, there is, you know, the word or here, not and. Up here it says and, but or is what compensation. So just when you're sitting down with your sellers in that listing presentation, make sure that if they want to offer dollar amount, make sure you check the dollar amount. If they want to offer a percentage, make sure they check a percentage. Okay. And once again, it is fully negotiable, even during the process, right? So a buyer's agent can come back and say, well, when I texted you asking for compensation, you said 2%. I feel like I'm worth 3. My buyer broker agreement says 3. So I'm going to ask for 3. And that's where that real estate brokerage payment addendum comes in. And we'll pull that up here shortly. Okay.
Also notice that says gross acquisition price, so versus the net.
Yes.
So
Yep. Yep, exactly. So that was actually a question that came up last week, and yes, so the default language is gross, but once again, fully negotiable. So if the seller, when an offer is presented, there can be an addendum that says, I'm not willing to pay commissions off of gross. I'm only paying off of net. Since the default language here is gross, the way to correct this would be an addendum to the exclusive right to sell agreement that would state that section 2.2, the word gross shall be switched out with net, something like that. Okay. So let's read the second part right here. In the event the company agrees in a written compensation agreement to pay a buyer's brokerage, the seller agrees that the payment amount will be added to the brokerage fee referenced in section 2.1. Added to. The company may not agree to a written compensation agreement that exceeds the authorized amount in section 2.2. Okay. So, and we've already been over that, so I won't repeat myself there. Okay. And then once again, yes.
So.
That's okay. Only on the listing side.
If we want, what's that?
Yeah.
Shut my mouth.
Yeah, no, that's they can't hear you. And this is one reason why I've asked that questions be held to the end,
Okay.
because I think we have several hundred people online and we have to hand the mic around.
Okay.
So when we get to the
So-
Q&A part,
So if we just want to leave it open and let people look at it, make offers, and then let our seller decide. we
yes,
can Just put TBD.
only on the buyer
In
section.
2.2, only in the buyer section.
Yes.
On the
Yep.
listing.
So if a buyer's agent reaches out to you and says, hey, I saw your property on 123 Apple Street. How much are you offering in compensation? And you can say, my seller chose not to actually put any dollar amount or percentage amount, but they're willing to pay. When you present an offer, go ahead and ask for compensation. It'll be negotiated in the offer. So, okay, some repeat language here. Very similar to the buyer broker agreement. You'll see, I won't reread it, but it's basically that language that says you won't be a party to the lawsuit. Okay. And then let's go ahead and jump into, we've done the buyer broker agreement, we've done the listing agreement. And then we have this real estate brokerage compensation agreement. Okay. And this one, in my opinion, is the one that's probably creating a lot of confusion. I want to see if they've updated this because there were no lines. So let's go back and see if the UAR has finally updated these. So exclusive right to sell. Agreement and agency disclosure. Hold on. Real estate brokerage compensation. That is not it. Hold on. There we go. Okay. Okay, it looks like they finally put in those two lines. Okay. Now, okay, I can see why I didn't print it. I guess if you didn't put anything in there, then it's not going to show anything, right? Let's just see. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, good. So then we have the latest form. Let's take a look at this form real fast, okay? So this agreement is between the seller's brokerage and the buyer's brokerage, okay? And you'll see right here, it says in contemplation of a potential real estate transaction between buyer and seller. And this agreement is to provide compensation kind of pre-establish compensation between the parties, okay? So I've been told that this agreement can be used to basically get all the commission portion out of the way, okay? Let's go ahead and just read section 2 and section 3. So section 2 basically says this agreement between the seller's brokerage and the buyer's brokerage authorizes the escrow/closing office to disperse the payment of compensation directly to the buyer's brokerage as follows. And then boom, you have the compensation. Then section 3, provisions of buyer-broker agreement. A buyer's brokerage has a written buyer-broker agreement that obligates buyer to compensate buyer's brokerage. Buyer and buyer's brokerage agree that buyer's obligation may be satisfied by a third party, including the seller's brokerage. Buyer's brokerage may not accept compensation from any source that is greater than the buyer's obligation under the buyer-broker agreement, okay? I've been asked whether or not this will replace the escrow instruction form. My understanding is no. The escrow instruction form can still be used to make small tweaks to commissions, especially if you're giving commissions back as some type of concession. And we see that a lot. We'll see commissions given back to the buyer to do a rate buy down or to go toward loan costs, okay? That can be signed in this particular document or the escrow instruction form. This one can be signed at any stage of the purchase process. This does, you brought this up, Sherilyn, about title companies. My understanding, this is the main form that apparently title companies are starting to ask for, in addition to buyer-broker agreements, to ensure that everything matches up and aligns.
That's part of the RIPC, isn't it? That's part of the forms for the RIPS.
So this is not. This one is not. So this is
The agents or brokers.
Mhm. Well, down here it does have an acknowledgement section by seller and
But it's
buyer.
But that's been received, but it's not.
Yeah.
Required.
Correct. And in my opinion, this form confuses me. I almost wish they didn't include it because I feel like it's just one additional form that's like, okay, I think they included it so that commissions could be pre-negotiated and decided upon, and then you have buyer and seller acknowledgements. It's almost like it just seems like a redundant form, in my opinion. So it can be. Yep, it can be. Okay. Yes, but you'll see right at the top, it says it's not an actual addendum to the contract. So, but it is, that's why a lot of agents asked last week, does this replace the escrow instruction form? And the more I inquired into that, the answer was no, but it seems very similar to that language. It's a way of establishing commissions between the parties, okay? Where I guess everybody's on the same page, right? It's that one form that brings together all the parties and has acknowledgements, and you're able to see the compensation being paid to the seller's brokerage, okay? And then of course you can throw any additional terms in there, and that's one reason why I'm like, it feels like an escrow instruction replacement, but apparently we're going to keep the escrow instruction form, okay?
David,
Yeah.
so that form can be signed either by the agent or the broker?
I think it specifically says broker, but let's scroll down and take a look. Or scroll up. Authorized seller's agent or broker. So either one.
Either one.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, let us go to the real estate brokerage payment addendum. And this is the form that's going to be used for additional compensation, okay? And this is kind of where I feel like we have one of those oxymoron moments where we have these buyer-broker agreements and these, well, primarily the buyer-broker agreement that states that you cannot receive compensation greater, and yet we have a form that allows for greater compensation. So that confused people last week. I inquired about it. Apparently that whole thing about receiving additional compensation is a no-no, and yet we can do it. It's just you have to somehow objectively prove that you're providing some added benefit, okay? But this is the form that you would receive if you're receiving higher compensation. Now, let me tell you where this is used and not a conflict, okay? Where this is used and it's not a conflict is you've signed a buyer-broker agreement where the compensation is, let's use your example, 5%, and you want 5%, okay? But the listing's only offering 2. This is where you can go to the listing agent and the seller and ask for additional compensation. You're offering 2, I need an additional 3% to satisfy my buyer broker agreement, okay? So the key distinction there is that you can't increase what's on your buyer broker agreement without some objectively provable evidence that you're providing greater service. But if your buyer broker agreement already has greater compensation and you're pushing for that greater compensation, this is the form you're going to use. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, don't make the mistake I made. Every time I go looking for this form, I was typing the word commission, and I wish the title of the form had the word commission somewhere. You want to type in the word payment. And I get so frustrated. I'll go into the form section. I'm like, commission. Why can't I find that form? Payment is in the title. Yeah, and I'm going through all of them looking for commission. I'm like, I know it's greater commission. No, it's payment addendum. Okay. So just be aware of that. Okay. I think I finally just like X'd out the forms and then scrolled until I'm like, oh, it's real estate payment addendum. So, okay, now let's jump into the addendum to the exclusive right to sell agreement. And we have the same one for the exclusive buyer broker agreement. So the question that's coming up is, what do I do with transactions that are already under contract? Or what do I do with buyer broker agreements or exclusive right to sell agreements that I have in force? You know, they're active agreements. Should you get an addendum to those agreements? The answer that we've gotten is yes, you should. You should modify your existing exclusive right to sell agreement to update it with this type of language, okay? Right here. Okay. Says if you are under contract, your listing agreement or buyer broker agreement, do not need to.
If it's under contract, you don't need anything.
Well, hold on. If the transaction's under contract or if you just have an active.
Transaction is under.
If your transaction's under contract, you do not need to be amended with UAR addendum, okay? Okay. Yes. Now, he does say here, he says, but to ensure you have proof of any prior offer of compensation, you should print off the listing for any under contracts as evidence of a prior agreement to pay a BAC. Okay.
So it goes into effect, in 5 minutes. So
Yeah.
this morning you should have printed off everything that you have under contract, just so you know what it's getting.
Okay.
You know, I'm getting a fair number of comments from people that are not hearing the questions and comments, so.
Okay.
They're kind of lost.
Okay, so once again, a request to hold your comments and questions till the end, okay? And please write them down if you can. And then that way, Chris, you're right, we'll be able to hand around the mic so people can hear the questions. Okay, once again, so this is what, Stevie brought this to my attention, same type of thing here. Under section 2.2, this is the addendum. It says the company is authorized to advertise or otherwise communicate that the seller and or the company is offering to pay compensation to a buyer's brokerage in the amount of blank or blank, okay? Of the gross acquisition price. Once again, everything's fully negotiable. And this section right here basically states that it will satisfy what the buyer broker agreement has, okay? So just repeated language, but just kind of copied and pasted into different sections, okay? And then down here, same type of thing, the addendum to the exclusive buyer broker agreement has the same thing. The company cannot or may not accept total compensation from any source that is greater than the brokerage fee, okay? So Linda, just to make sure I understand, if you're under contract, you don't need to amend your agreements. If you're not under contract, you should amend your agreements prior to August 17th, okay?
Yeah.
Okay. I think we are wrapping up and then we'll get to our Q&A section. I do want to go back to the showing agreement. This will be made available today on Realtypath Library. And once again, like I mentioned, our legal counsel is adding a liability waiver. I guess the intent behind that is to basically say that if you've taken somebody through property, damage is done to that property, they're not going to hold you liable. They're basically, indemnifying you of any potential liability that could happen. So, and I've had some agents say, well, gosh, if you're getting this signed just to show a property, why not just get the buyer broker agreement signed? I couldn't agree more. I would shoot to get the buyer broker agreement signed if you could pin that buyer down. But once again, if you're trying to build rapport, this is a good starting point. Okay. So, Linda, before we do Q&A, are you wanting to?
Let's do the role play.
You want to do the role play?
Yeah.
Okay, let's do. And I'm going to actually bring, well, actually I won't. I wanted to bring that over just so that we had a document to reference. Okay, so Linda is going to be our seller.
Yes, I'm
I'm
gonna be
going
the
to
client.
be the listing agent. So, okay. So Linda, we just went over the exclusive right to sell agreement. Do you have any questions as it relates to how real estate commissions now operate?
Well, my sister told me that she saw something on the news that I don't have to pay a buyer's agent at all.
Okay. And guess what? That is potentially true. One thing to keep in mind that the majority of buyers are represented by a buyer's agent. So you are right. You're not obligated to pay a buyer's agent. However, I strongly recommend that you offer some form of compensation, because that is going to entice buyer's agents to want to work with us and bring their clients. Now, that buyer's agent does have an agreement with their buyer, and that buyer has agreed to pay them. But more than likely, the compensation that they've negotiated, they're going to ask you to pay for.
Yeah,
Okay.
but then I'm gonna have to pay, like, what if they offer less? And then they're gonna be asking for closing costs, and they're gonna be asking for repairs. Like, I can't just give it all away to the buyer.
Yeah. Well, that's why all of this is fully negotiable. If they come in with an offer that's a pretty strong offer, it's my job as your agent to show you where properties are selling, give you a sense of how the market's going. In this market, it's a tough market right now. So we're going to really want to look at all the offers that come in. And if we have an offer that comes in that's really low and asking for a fair amount of compensation, we can negotiate both the offer and the compensation.
Okay.
And in some cases, if the offer is good and we really need to pay that buyer's agent so that their agreement between their buyer is satisfied, in some scenarios, we can even increase the price. So.
Okay, to cover it?
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
all right. So we can do it, like, we can just take a look at it when the offers come in?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Now, my strong recommendation is commissions kind of average in that 2 to 3% range. I think you're going to get a lot of buyer's agents reaching out to me, asking me what compensation is. I can tell them, if you want, that no compensation is being offered, or to make an offer, and when they make an offer to add compensation to their offer, or I can give them a dollar amount. I strongly recommend that you offer something in that 2 to 3% range, because that's usually what a buyer's agent is looking for.
Okay. I mean, I will if the offer's good. So I don't want to be held to that amount and then get a low offer and have to pay that out.
Well, no worries. This section 2.2 of the exclusive right to sell agreement gives you that opportunity to fully negotiate commissions.
Okay.
So.
Okay.
Okay.
Good.
Good. Any questions on that?
Let's say, in my 24 years history of doing real estate, it's always been the buyer's responsibility. That has never changed in the state of Utah. So I've always said that in the listing agreement, hey, marketing does affect. And so if we go about and offer this, if we have 20 homes out on the market that fits one buyer's criteria, search criteria, and realize they're not just shopping, my market area is bountiful, they're shopping from North Salt Lake clear up to Layton. And look how I've showed you a rough draft of what's of it, your competition. So if you're not able to offer, if you're not willing to offer compensation, what I do as a buyer's agent when I'm representing the buyer, I let them know I demand at least 2.5% commission. There are other agents out there that offer $500, 2%, 1%. And I tell my clients, you're going to be responsible to make up the difference. There are builders out there that are offering no no compensation unless you go in very first time with them. And so my clients do know that, and I educate. And most savvy agents do the same thing. So most people won't bring up the lawsuit because they've heard about it, but they don't know the impacts of it. So why bring it up when it's a non-issue already in the city of Utah? That's my thought.
I think that's a good thought. I think that selling what makes you worth your hire is
Right.
probably the most important thing we can do as an agent.
Exactly.
So
So correct me if I'm wrong, but we can go into a listing appointment and already have contacted the houses you're gonna compete with and ask what the compensation is.
sure.
Then you say, hey, Mrs. Seller, I know commission is important to you. I also know selling your house is important to you. So what I went ahead and did is I reached out to these other homes. Here's what
Yeah.
they told me they're paying.
Yes, I think that's a great strategy. Yeah, I think that in combination to NAR statistics based on 2023 figures is that 84% of buyers are represented by an agent. If you're not offering a compensation, you could easily lose out on that.
It's part of their job is marketing their house to get to the most.
Yeah, the compensation's a part of it. Mhm.
It's human nature.
Yep.
And if a buyer knows that he has to pay difference, I've had buyers where we go up to a house, I'm like, hey, just so that you're aware. And, we're gonna be calling beforehand, so we already know what the BAC is. These guys are gonna be offering this. Do you wanna make up the difference? You leave it to your buyer's decision, not yours. And I've had lots of people say, let's skip this.
Yeah.
Because they're not willing to.
Go ahead.
What about open houses? Do you have to have somebody sign a form every time they come in?
No, great question. So this is actually a follow-up from last week, which I appreciate. And that is, if you're the listing agent and an unrepresented buyer reaches out to you, do you have to get a showing form signed? The answer is no. Part of your ability to advertise the home on behalf of the seller is to be able to show buyers who want to come in and see it. Okay. Now, I think as a result, are listings going to become more competitive? Probably, for that very reason. They're already super competitive, but let me get April here real fast and then I'll come back. Okay. And we'll do a buyer one as well. Okay. And by the way, I neglected to show you the REPSI yet in section 4.3. So I'll pull that up as well while you're asking a question.
So on the seller's agreement, then as you're sitting there role playing, can you do like, say for 3% for the seller's agent, but then mark the box on the dollar amount for the compensation for the buyer? Okay.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Okay, let's hit pause and then we'll go back. And you had a question back there. I haven't forgotten about you.
So if we're the listing agent, we get an unrepresented buyer, we can show them the house, right?
Correct.
If it's an open house, they don't need an agreement. I saw on the news just before I came here that if it's an open house, they do. So is that exclusive to Utah or is that media misrepresentation? I'm assuming it's the media, but
Yeah, and you'll have to forgive me if I give you any misinformation today. Just know that I've received the question. If I don't know the answer, I usually say I don't know, and let me find out. And that's usually what I do. And I usually turn to Curtis or Deanna Savy and say, "What do you know?" So if that's what you've heard, I'm going to go off of what Deanna said for now, which I think simplifies our lives. I mean, gosh, could you imagine? Like in practice, there's letter of the law, spirit of the law, there's theory, and then there's practice, right? And I think in practice, it's already hard. I did an open house not too long ago. I couldn't get anybody to sign my roster. As much as I tried, I was like, the sellers really want to know who's come through their property. And they're like, yeah. And like, they put like Bob, and I'm like, so I could be more forceful, but I think it's just going to be hard with people who come in to do that in practice. So Sherilyn.
Can a listing agent ask to see a copy of your buyer broker agreement?
My understanding is yes. I don't see any reason why you would withhold that. Especially where we see this in big bold letters everywhere now, right? All these forms have been modified with everything is fully negotiable, which I think would be like, well, I want to see, especially if you're presenting that real estate brokerage payment addendum and you're like, well, my BAC or my buyer broker agreement, my BBA says 5% using Cesar's example. And now you're asking for 2% more. They may say, well, show me a copy of your buyer broker agreement. I want to see that you're asking for more compensation, So I saw another hand pop
I've
up.
got one more question.
And then we'll come back.
Okay, sorry.
Was it?
If the buyer's exclusive buyer agreement says that they're only going to take 1%, and your ERS says that it's 3% or 2% to the.
You can't take more.
They can't take more.
Can't
So
take-
where's that leftover money go? Does it go like?
Goes back to the seller.
It does go back to the seller.
Yep.
Okay, so it's
Yep.
kind of like the old.
The only way, once again, and we've had every attorney tell us this, the only way that you could go up is if you're saying, well, say it's a short sell. I'm a short sell expert. I've got years of experience. Here's my data to show that I can go up. You have to somehow objectively prove that you're worth even more than what you've put on your BBA.
Okay.
So, yep. Huh? Yeah. Let me hit here real fast and look right here.
So if the exclusive right to sell has, let's say, 2.5% on there, but in your offer, you have an addendum that you want to have the commission be 3%. Is there anything additional beyond that addendum that's going to be needed either from the listing agent or the buyer's agent?
So two things need to match. Your buyer broker agreement needs to say 3. You said go up by 0.5%. Did I understand you right?
But let's say that the buyer broker agreement is 4%. Who cares?
Okay.
Like we're talking about the listing side, they've agreed to compensate the buyer's agent 2.5%.
Okay.
And then the addendum that you submit in the offer says 3%. It's higher than what they've agreed to on the listing agreement. Is there other documentation that's going to be needed?
Nothing more than your that payment addendum, that real estate brokerage payment addendum. The one other thing you should do, this is what I've been told, is using your example. If your BBA, your buyer broker agreement is 4%, you should amend it to go down to 3. Okay, so everything should match. In the past, we've left things open-ended, especially if it's coming down. Okay, and in your example, you're coming down. The listing's offering 2.5. In your negotiations, you're trying to go up to 3. Your buyer broker agreement has 4. Your buyer broker agreement should be amended to go down to 3. And that real estate payment addendum should be increasing by 0.5% to get you to that 3. Yep. And I'll come to you. Hold on, right back here. Go ahead.
So let's say we're the listing agent and we have an unrepresented buyer come through that doesn't know what they're doing. You're going to be doing more work. That's going to constitute, a raise in price for my services, right? I
Yes.
mean,
Yeah, good.
because they do come direct, but you also have to manage the transaction. Is that okay?
Yeah. So
Okay.
let's talk real fast. I love that you brought this up. I actually have this in my notes. Let's talk real fast about limited agency. Can you be a limited agent? The answer is yes. You need to know that there's actually a strong push from a fair amount of agents to change the law to prohibit limited agency. Okay.
And Utah State is
Yeah.
looking at that.
Yeah, and they are seriously considering that. Okay, but now it is allowed. Let me just add one thing to your question before you ask a follow-up question. It's a little tricky because you've only negotiated one side of the transaction, right? You've only now negotiated, well, you may have negotiated both sides. You may have negotiated compensation to a buyer's agent, and you've negotiated your side. I do think that it's very important to educate your seller on limited agency beforehand, where you tell them, hey, if an unrepresented buyer comes along, even though we've considered or not considered, even though we have already pre-negotiated that we're going to pay, let's say 3% to a buyer's agent, I'm willing to just do an additional 1% if an unrepresented buyer comes along. I would have that conversation beforehand.
But it still is your client's choice
Yeah.
if they will allow you to do limited
Yeah.
agency.
And if your seller pushes back, then you have to go the unrepresented buyer direction, where you would have the buyer sign an unrepresented buyer form.
Yeah, that's the one I was talking about because not limited agency, but unrepresented buyer, can I still charge my seller more?
Sure.
Because I'm still working with the buyer and answering their questions, not representing them, but making sure the transaction closes. It does take more work. with
Yes,
these guys.
however, here, I'm glad you asked this question because this is a key distinction. If you're not a limited agent, you cannot dip into the part you've already pre-negotiated for a buyer's agent's commission, which is a little bit of concern. Think about that. That will force more agents to want to go the limited agent route because you now have a separation in listing commission and buyer's agent's commission, right? To your question, you can't just go to the seller and say, hey, there's an unrepresented buyer, I need you to pay more. You can do that if you amend your exclusive right to sell agreement with an addendum to the exclusive right to sell agreement saying we have an unrepresented buyer and the seller agrees to pay 1% more to the listing brokerage because there's more liability, okay? But just be aware that you can't dip into that buyer's agent's commission like you could in the past. Were any of you confused when you would fill out the listing input form and get to that dual variance section? That's what dual variance was. Dual variance was the ability to dip into the buyer's agent's commission and negotiate in any way you wanted. It was a way of saying that if an unrepresented buyer comes, I can adjust the commission to make this unrepresented buyer's offer stronger than any other offer that comes in, okay? We actually saw it a lot back in like 2008 with all the short sales. You would see short sell listing agents who would modify the commission using dual variance to sweeten the deal so they can double slide the transaction. So, but be aware the dual variance is gone. That's no longer on the MLS. That'll be gone. The principle remains. But if you're looking for additional compensation with an unrepresented buyer, you would need to amend your exclusive right to sell agreement. Okay. And then back here.
You mentioned texting the agent and asking about commission or payment.
Yes.
Is there any legal thing where they say, yes, we offer 2.5, and then you get into offers and they go, oh, no, I've never said that, or I'm not paying that, or.
Ooh, yeah, we talked about this last week. So there is recent legislation. I don't know if legislation is the right word, but there's been a modification in the Utah real estate code that says that text messages and emails can now be legally binding. Okay. So without trying to interpret the law or pretend I'm an attorney, my hunch would be yes, that if you've replied and said, hey, yes, the compensation's 3%. But then the seller comes back and says, hey, I want to modify all commission. I want to drop what I'm offering to the buyer's agent. If someone asked you a month ago, but now they're inquiring a month later, they're now inquiring now, and they're saying, hey, a month ago you said that they're offering 2.5%. Are they still offering 2.5%? I think it's worth asking. Regardless of what's in a text, what I think is a good result of this lawsuit is it's now all in writing. So when the offer comes in, could it create some problems if you've committed to 2.5? Yes, but behind the scenes, they may not know of future negotiations between you and the seller. So I still think it's fully negotiable. Yeah. Go back here first, and then we'll come back up to you, April.
Closing, is the compensation reflected anywhere?
No.
Because that would influence comps.
Yeah. Yep. Well, and so not to derail our conversation, but I'll make a quick mention that in the mortgage industry, there's a lot of discussion about whether commissions can be financed. And it sounds like some of your big lenders like UWM, they're considering this. They're considering allowing that, especially in situations where a seller may be a stick in the mud saying, no way, Jose, I'm not paying any buyer's compensation. And yet a buyer is loyal to their agent and says, well, I want to get you paid. it sounds like coming through the pipeline will be the ability to finance buyer's agents commissions. So, and how that affects appraisals, I don't know. Hopefully we get a little bit more, what's the right word, maybe liberal appraisers who understand how all of this is adjusting our industry.
Okay, so let's say that it can't be advertised on the MLS, and let's say that I don't have any private, website or something, or my company doesn't. Can you advertise the commission on like KSL?
My understanding is yes, but what the lawsuit is trying to avoid is any type of centralized MLS system that would advertise compensation for every brokerage. So one thing that is permissible from this suit is for a brokerage to advertise all their compensation. So our website, for example, will have the ability for agents to log in and put all of their compensation in there. My understanding is if you're advertising on some third-party website like Zillow or like KSL, you're shaking your head and saying,
It's their data from the MLS.
I know, but if it's a manual input, my understanding is if you're manually going in, you can say compensation.
No.
I would say that's a no.
From one
I don't
podcast I heard, who was from somebody who's involved in the lawsuit directly. He's like, I've been to depositions. He says, no, you cannot.
Okay.
It's
That's
and
fine.
he
Let me
says,
find out for you.
After the spirit of the law too.
Yeah.
You open yourself up for law liability.
Okay. Now, got my new MLS photos.
There's 3% in the
Oh,
lawn.
3% in the lawn.
Just put it in the lawn, so you can probably put it in the
You see your compensation, right? Put it in the lawn. Paint it on the rooftop and get drone photos. Yeah. Now let's hit pause real fast. Chris, I think you mentioned that there may be some people online with some questions. Are there anyone? It's mega. Oh, okay. From what you can tell, have we hit most of? Okay. Okay. Now, this is confusing to me because I did want to show you this, but from what I can tell, it hasn't been modified, Linda. There was a video that Lance Harrison released last week, a short little 4-minute video from the UAR where this section right here included additional payments. And I think it created enough controversy because there were a lot of agents who came up and said, well, the language in that states that it's in addition to what's already pre-negotiated. From what I can, and it was right down here, I can see that it hasn't been added yet.
It's not added.
And it makes me wonder if they're scrapping it all together. So if they do, I think that actually simplifies things for us. But there was a little section right here that said like real estate commissions, and then it allowed for the buyer's agent to actually just write in what their compensation was going to be. So until that's an actual official change, I'm going to assume they're going to remove it. So
That's the change. You probably won't need that brokerage amendment, right? That's basically that's what it was, right?
yeah, so Caleb just asked whether or not we would need that brokerage payment addendum if it is an official change, and I would agree with you. The answer would be no. I think that would replace the brokerage payment addendum. So
Yeah, question. If I have a listing today or tomorrow, can I use the new listing agreement?
my understanding is yes, you can go ahead and use all
And
of
the buyer brokerage agreement? too?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah. That way you're covered, because if you use the old one, you're gonna have to modify it in 3 days. So best to go ahead and use the new one. Okay. You want to role play on the buyer end?
Yeah.
Okay. Good. And then we'll get back to more questions. Okay. Are you the client again?
I'm the client
Okay,
again.
good.
I'm the buyer.
Linda, it's such a pleasure to be your buyer's agent. And I just want you to know that when we go out to look at homes, there's a requirement here in the state of Utah. I do have an agreement that is full representation. I'm going to make the assumption that I've already talked to you about all the benefits of working with me. Okay. We've gone over why it's important to have me as your agent and what I can do to help you find a home, negotiate an offer. Here is the exclusive right or exclusive buyer broker agreement. More often than not, the compensation that is in this agreement will probably be paid by the seller. My goal when we make an offer is for them to compensate me, but you do need to know that in some rare circumstances, you may have to come out of pocket for that compensation, okay? Now, my understanding is that compensation could be rolled in as concessions and covered through your loan. It's a very rare circumstance that we'll probably not be able to negotiate this with our offer, okay? So we should be able to negotiate this with our offer, okay? That's good because that means more than likely you're not going to have to come out of pocket.
Yeah, because I can't afford that. I
Yeah.
don't, like,
Yep.
I have to have my down payment and, you know, I'm gonna be wanting to do paint and new cabinets and I'm not gonna have the money to pay you.
Yes.
So are you gonna know what if the seller is offering to pay you?
Yeah, so that's actually one of the things I'm required to do is I have to reach out to the listing agent. I need to ask them what the compensation is. My agreement here says 3%. I want you to know that I feel like I'm worth my hire. I'm going to shoot for that. If a listing is offering less, that's probably okay. I'm going to look at what they're offering and we can address it at that time when we make an offer. But my goal is to get what's in this agreement. Okay. But if a listing is offering less and it's acceptable to me and we're good with it, then we're going to move forward. Okay.
So I want to go see a bunch of homes on Saturday. I sent you like 20.
Let's go.
Are you gonna find out if each one is paid? Because I don't
Yeah.
want to see the ones that are not gonna pay you because I'm
thank
not gonna
you.
be able to pay you.
Well, I
So,
appreciate that. Thank you. Yes, I will call on each one of them. Okay. And we'll make sure what the compensation is. If one of them is saying they don't offer compensation, I'm going to see if they're going to be willing to pay. And we're just going to take it circumstantially, one property at a time. Okay. But yes, we'll make sure that we get all those showings set up. And then, of course, if you're good, we'll sign that buyer broker agreement. Okay.
Okay.
Now, the other scenario would be you push back. I've got this buyer broker agreement.
I don't want to sign anything. You know
Okay.
what? I'm interviewing a bunch of agents and I need to know if I'm going to get along with you. And
Yeah.
I don't know that right now.
Do you know, I totally get that. I think it's important to know that our personalities mesh well. And I want you to know I'm going to work hard for you. It is required by law that I get this signed prior to making an offer. But in the meantime, I do have this showing agreement that gives me authorization to show you as many homes as you want. It doesn't obligate you the way that this agreement does. But why don't we go down the road? If you're okay, let's start here with this agreement. Let's show you the homes that you want to see. And if you feel like we've got good rapport and you want to work with me, I'm going to need to get this agreement signed.
Okay.
Does that sound good?
But for now, I can, because I've met with a few other agents, so
Yeah.
I can work with all of the agents at
Yep.
once if I want. Okay.
Yep.
All right.
No issue there.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah. And hopefully, I mean, you probably will get that. You'll probably get that from time to time.
Yeah.
And you know, it is about building rapport. I'm sure there's clients that you guys have worked with that you wish you never would have, you know, so. Okay.
Okay, so it sounds to me like in the beginning, it's an either or with the two forms, with the buyer broker. However, if you get the buyer broker agreement, you do not need the other form?
Correct.
Okay,
Yep.
as far as our company is concerned, because that's our own company form.
It's our own company form, but you are required as a result of this lawsuit, all agents are required as a result of this lawsuit to have either some type of showing form signed or a buyer broker agreement filled out.
Okay, so if
Yeah.
you get the buyer broker in the beginning, you don't need to worry about it, but if you're resistant like you were,
Yeah.
then, okay.
Yep. I'll win her over. Don't worry. We're going to show her homes. I'm going to wow her. She's going to want to work with me.
See who's going to treat me the best.
That's right. And you may get that. You probably will get that. So the tough part of this is when you get a client who says, well, so-and-so from such and such company told me I didn't need to sign anything.
I remember, do you know,
You're-
I remember having that same thing in the short sale days. Hey, these guys are willing to do this, and it's completely illegal. I said, really, who was it?
Well, and that's
After the property closed,
Mhm.
because I didn't keep listing and everything else, I filed a formal complaint with the board.
Yeah.
I've only done 3 in my couple of days of doing this.
okay.
But
So
it was completely, I said, that is completely 100% illegal.
Mhm.
If you do it, I will file a formal complaint and you could be held liable.
yes.
And
Yes.
so realize you're doing the bank's doing I explained the short sale process to him and I did file a formal complaint.
Yes. So you just told
He was doing that agent was doing something completely illegal.
Yeah.
And I don't have a problem with
Yeah.
that. Like I said, in my career, it's only been 3 times
Mhm.
that I've filed, but it's like, it's because of completely illegal.
Yeah.
Action.
Yep. So you stole the words out of my mouth. We're going to be a self-reporting industry. Now,
Don't be afraid. It's our industry.
you're probably going to get some buyers who push back and say, no, I'm not giving you a name. But I think it's important to just say, well, it's your right. You don't have to share with me, but you need to know that they are violating the rules and they cannot do that, you know?
That's not a law, but.
Yes. Yep. So just be aware that I think that's where, well, hopefully we support each other. That's where this industry is going to stay strong, is if we abide by the rules. And I'm sure we're going to, because we don't want to go before an ethics committee because we told some buyer that we would show them properties without a form. So yes.
So I want to be clear. Am I catching on that there are mortgage companies now that will actually put that into their mortgage?
Yeah,
The
compensation.
The
Yeah,
compensation.
don't quote me
So-
on it. It's just
Okay.
discussions.
So it hasn't been, it's not a,
No.
okay, so I'm not gonna be advertising saying that.
Yeah, I would not do that until somebody like Robert, you know, until your loan officer says, hey, I can finance your commission. And once you hear that, then yeah, I think here's what I think's going on behind the scenes. They want to wait and see. I think the lenders are going, oh, we don't want to finance more, right? I mean, that if you finance more, what does that do? It requires usually more money down, right? It increases liability on the part of the borrower. So I think what the mortgage industry is doing is I think they're holding off, waiting to see how many sellers choose not to pay a buyer's agent's commission and how much pushback they get. But it sounds like it is something that could come through the pipeline. Okay.
I was just gonna say, either way, we're not lenders, so we probably shouldn't be advertising lending programs.
No, always best to say, reach out to my lender. They told me this. Yes.
I had an agent from another company say that their company just says to put it in the agent remarks that you're willing to compensate.
You can
Not
put that,
percentage.
you can put that sellers will pay concessions. You can't put a percentage and you can't put an amount.
Yeah.
And you can say concessions
Where they are
in
wrong,
remarks.
to make a clear distinction, you can't make any reference toward commissions.
Right,
But you could say seller to pay concessions.
concessions.
I really think that what's going to happen in practice is I'm going to reach out and say, hey, how much are you offering on that listing? It's just going to be constant discussion back and forth. Hey, your property on such and such street, how much you offering in a buyer's agent's compensation?
I went on a listing appointment just the other day and the guy says, I'm happy to pay you your commission, but I don't want to pay the buyer's agent's commission. And so if I end up listing with these people, I'm thinking we're probably gonna have to just say that, it's negotiable, put it in. So is that, I'm hoping that won't deter showings or anything like that. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think what's great is it may deter showings. So, and I think you should tell your seller that. Just say, it's fine to go the route that you want to go. In fact, that's totally kosher. I just want you to know, I think we'll get a better chance of getting more buyer's agents and their clients if there is some type of compensation being offered. So the question I would have you ask your seller is, if the offer is good enough, would you pay? The answer is probably going to be yes. If we increase the price, okay, yeah. And I think that's where you can hint, but you also want to be careful with hinting. I think you just want to basically say, if a buyer's agent reaches out, just say, include your compensation in the offer, the seller will look at it.
Right.
But even then, you probably might not get as many showings as if you have a percent.
Yeah, if you have something locked in, I think that seller's going to get a lot more showings, Now we know, due to the preamble of the Code of Ethics, we have an obligation as buyer's agents to show every property.
Okay, but once again, that your client wants, and then you educate them saying, hey, I'm not willing to do a BAC for $500 or 1% or 2%. I don't do 2%. I'm sorry, never have in my career. And so I let my clients know ahead of time. And before it was a lot easier because, hey, here's the BAC on this. Are you willing to go? And they're saying yes or no. It's their decision. It's always their decision.
Yeah, good point. There's one more hand, and I think we're just about to wrap up.
I was going to ask, so I reviewed some of the National Association stuff that's online. And my understanding is like we're not even gonna be able to show how much commission was paid, you know,
No.
at
Correct.
all.
Yeah.
So are agents gonna count that as concessions now? Are we collectively gonna do that so we'll all know, or we're not gonna?
So there will be no reporting structure. You did mention something that has a little bit of a yes in there, and that is, can concessions go toward real estate commissions? And the answer is yes.
Okay,
So
so
you
are they
can,
taking out the concessions on the form then?
you mean when you close
Well,
out a transaction?
Yeah. Are we gonna be?
Oh, I don't know. Yeah,
Concessions?
I don't know. I just know that compensation will no longer be recorded. So even the concessions that could still remain on the MLS would be concessions that don't go toward real estate compensation.
Right.
Yeah, so like loan costs. So, okay, we are technically out of time, but Linda and I will remain afterward. And I appreciate you guys. Thank you for being here. If you've got any follow-up questions, thank you. Well, I'll take the round of applause.
And there's lunch back there from First Rate Mortgage.
There is lunch back there, so.
You know, when I show the compensation on the map.